So now let's use what we know about rounding to estimate a sum or a difference. So remember, a sum is the answer we get when we add numbers together, and the difference is the answer we get when we subtract numbers. So first, in this first example, we are adding three numbers together. So I could do this with pen and paper or a calculator, but let's suppose I didn't have those things and I just wanted to get an estimate. I wanted to be able to do it in my head quickly just to get a roundabout number of what those things would be added together. So 7,958, if I were to round that to the nearest thousand, that would be 8,000. So just to remind you, we look at the number that we're rounding to, which is in this case the thousands, and then we look to the number beside it, and since it's a 9, that's greater than 5, so that's going to bump this 7 up to an 8. So that's how we got the 8,000. And in the same way, this would round to 5,000, and this would round to 4,000. So now I'm able to add those numbers in my head. So 8,000 plus 5,000 plus 4,000 is 17,000. So if I were to actually add these numbers together, the exact sum is 17,259. So that means our estimate is pretty close. So remember, an estimate is just making the numbers easier to do in your head, and you're going to get something that's close if you do it correctly, but it won't be the exact sum. So let's look over here. Here we're subtracting two numbers. So in the same way, I'm going to round to the nearest thousand just to make the numbers easier to do in my head. So 8,134 will round to 8,000. 4,917 will round to 5,000. And now I have numbers that I can calculate in my head. So 8,000 minus 5,000 is 3,000. So just so you know, the exact difference, if I were to subtract these numbers here, I get 3,217, which is pretty close to my estimate. So that's what we're going for, a number that's pretty close, give us a general idea, but is still numbers that we can work with in our head. So we can do the same thing when we multiply to estimate a product. So remember, a product is the answer that you get when you multiply. So the question says, estimate the value of 6,327 times 7. Now, I cannot do that in my head, but if I needed to, I could use rounding to help me get an answer that would be in the ballpark, meaning it would be pretty close, but not exact. So I'm going to round this 6,327 to the nearest thousand. So using my rounding rules, I know that that number would round to 6,000. And then I'm going to take that 6,000 and multiply it by 7. Now that I can do in my head. So 6,000 times 7 is 42,000. So that means 6,327 times 7 is about 42,000. It's not exactly 42,000, but it's about 42,000. So if we come down here, just so we can compare, the exact value is 44,289. So it's pretty close. It's in the ballpark. That's what we say when we mean it's pretty close. So we can see that we estimated correctly. So finally, we can also use rounding when we divide to to estimate a quotient. So remember, a quotient is the number that we get when the answer that we get when we divide. So with division, it's a little bit different. We are going to round, but we're not necessarily going to round to the nearest thousand. And the reason is because we're trying to round to a number that is evenly divisible by the number we're dividing by. So let's look at an example. Here they're asking us to estimate the value of 6,742 divided by 8. So here it is on the number line. And if I were going to round to the nearest thousand, then that would be 7,000. But if I try to divide 7,000 by 8, I can't really do that in my head because that doesn't come out even, or it doesn't make it really easy to do in my head. So instead, when we divide, we are looking for a number that's close to, in this case, 6,742, but that's easily or evenly divisible by 8. So in this case, I go through my multiples and I think, okay, 8 times 8 is 64. So 6,400 or 6,400, that's pretty close to 6,742. Or I could go on the other end and I could say, all right, 8 times 9 would be 7,200. I can do that in my head. So here I've got two numbers that are pretty close on either side, and they're both divisible by 8, which is going to make it easier for me to work with in my head. So when you try to choose which one to use, you just choose the one that it's closer to. So in this case, 6,742 is closer to 6,400. So I'm going to use 6,400 just to get a better estimate. Okay, so I chose 6,400 to make the estimate. So now I'm going to say 6,400 divided by 8. And again, if I know my multiples of 8, I can do that in my head, and I get 800. So 6,742 divided by 8 is about 800. So again, it's not exactly 800. Remember, we're just doing an estimate. So that means it's about 800. So just to look down here to compare, it says the actual quotient is 842 and 75 hundredths. So that's pretty close to 800. So we know we're in the ballpark. We know we got a general good idea of the answer.